Tales from Europe. The King and the Peasant. From Poland. The sun was setting, and an aged peasant named Matthew was just ending his day of ploughing in the fields. In the distance he heard a song echoing between the hills. Turning in the direction of the sound, he saw a large company of men on horseback come out of the forest and ride along the highway toward the village. It was the king and his noblemen returning from the hunt. The king rode at the head of the company, followed by his lords and councillors and many others in gleaming armour, to the accompaniment of singing and the blowing of horns. It was a magnificent sight, and Matthew, when he saw the knights in their shining armour, could not take his eyes off of them. Great was his astonishment when the king, bringing his company to a halt on the highway by a signal with his hand, rode with 3 of his councillors directly across the field to where Matthew stood. The old peasant pulled up his belt, smoothed out his coat, and holding his cap in his hand, humbly awaited the approach of the king. The king rode right up to the bowing peasant, and, having greeted him in God's name, said, "Old man, you did not rise early enough to do your work." Matthew replied, "I did, my gracious and beloved king, but the Lord God did not allow me." The king then asked, "Grandfather, how long has that snowy orchard been blooming on yonder sage mountain top?" 40 years already, my gracious lord." The king, nodding his head in understanding, asked again, "How long have the streams been flowing from under the mountain?" "Oh," Matthew replied, "for more than 15 years, my lord, they have been flowing and flowing." "So far, so good," said the king. "Now tell me, when 3 foolish geese from the east come to you, will you be able to fleece them?" "Oh, very well, my beloved and gracious king," the old peasant readily replied. Upon hearing these words, the king gave a golden belt to Matthew, and took leave of him with God's blessing. Joining his company, together with his 3 councillors, he was soon lost behind clouds of dust on the way to the capital. When they arrived at their destination, the king, his councillors, and the knights sat down to a sumptuous meal. And when they had finished, the king asked his 3 councillors, who had accompanied him on the visit to the peasant, to explain what his questions and the peasant's replies had meant. The councillors thought for a long time, trying to explain the riddles, but none of their guesses satisfied the king. At last the king said that they could have 30 days to find the right answers, but if they failed, the king said, he would choose other councillors to replace them. Night after night the councillors pondered and deliberated, but they could not unravel the meaning of the words. In the end, they went to see the peasant Matthew. Old Matthew received them at the threshold of his cottage, bowing humbly, but he refused to enlighten them. The councillors pleaded with him and threatened him, but it was all useless. Only when they had put on the table 100 golden ducats each, did Matthew, having gathered all the money into his pocket, spell out the meaning of the riddles for them. "Well, my first answer to our gracious king meant that I married young and had children, but that the Lord God took them away from me. The second answer meant that 40 years ago my hair turned gray. Then the king asked how long the streams had been flowing, meaning my tears of grief. Finally, the 3 foolish geese from the east referred to you, my lords, who came here to pay me to explain the conversation between the king and I. And as I promised the king, the geese have been well fleeced."